Awesome. Now remember, everything that's typed is in the Cornell notes. Okay, that's already available to you. And in those Cornell notes, I even have charts and images because we're going to be doing with the lost social hierarchies and like Columbian Exchange, things like that. Everything that's handwritten is not in your Cornell notes. So you should add that to your notes. Also, just because I don't write it down doesn't mean it's not important. If I repeat it, then that means that you need to write it down. And I will be very repetitive during this unit because I got to get it into your heads. Like, this is what I'm saying with the 3 Gs, or this is what I'm saying with the Reconquista, right? So let's do a little bit of, I almost said conquest. And I was like, no, we're done with the Mongols. Context, okay? Some context or background information for period 2. Period 2 is 1450 to 1750. So we've just finished period 1, which was 1200 to 1450. And just as a summary of what was going on in period 1, everyone was having a golden age except for Europe. China had a golden age with the Tang and the Song. The Abbasid and the Umayyad rose to power. Islam spread throughout Africa as well as through the Middle East. The Ottomans conquered Constantinople and renamed it Istanbul. Everyone was having a great time except for the Europeans. Okay, but 1450 is when we start the Renaissance, the rebirth of Greco-Roman antiquity, the rebirth of knowledge, the end of the Dark Ages. Okay, so period 1, things suck for Europe. Period 2, things get really awesome really fast. Okay, now we know that the largest contiguous land empire had been created by the Mongols, starting with Genghis Khan. But unfortunately for the Mongols, they weren't really that adept at administrating. Now, Kublai Khan was better at it with the Yuan dynasty in China, but for the most part, they were better conquerors than they were administrators. And so for about 100 years after Genghis Khan's death, that's when we see the collapse of the Mongol empires. But in their conquest, in conquering all of that area, the Mongols had inadvertently spread a disease. So we have biological diffusion of the bubonic plague, which is going to hit Europe really hard. It's going to kill about 1/3 of their population, which even though it kills a lot of serfs, that does help the serfs in the long run because it increases the value of their labor. Okay. But with the collapse of the Mongol empires, that also means the end of the Pax Mongolica in the 13th and 14th centuries. Remember that trade was awesome under the Pax Mongolica. The Silk Roads were safe. They had been revived since the fall of the Roman Empire, and everything was great. Once the Mongol empires collapse, the vacuum that's created, the power vacuum that's created there, along with the spread of the plague, is going to hurt trade. It's going to decrease trade on the Silk Road. And here we start seeing a shift away from land routes and towards ocean routes, particularly the Indian Ocean. Okay, but once the Mongols fall, the Ottomans fill that vacuum. So the Silk Road is controlled by Muslims. The Indian Ocean is populated largely by merchants, and merchants tend to be Muslim. Africa is dominated by Islam with their trade through the Trans-Saharan trade route. So most of the major trade routes in the old world are held by Muslim empires, okay, not European empires. In fact, there was a Muslim empire in Europe, the Al-Andalus, which ruled from the 700s until 1492. What happened in 1492 was that Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand reconquered Spain for Christianity, for the Catholics. So Spain was Muslim and a center of learning from around the 700s to 1492 until Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain came along and they reconquered it for the Catholics. Now, whereas under the Al-Andalus in the Iberian Peninsula, everyone was allowed to be whatever religion they wanted. Like in the Al-Andalus, you could be Muslim, you could be Christian, you could be Jewish, right? Under the Catholic kings and queens of Spain, Spain became much less tolerant and much less diverse. Okay, under the Spanish rule of Ferdinand and Isabella, you had to be Catholic or else. So if you're a Muslim or Jewish, you couldn't live in Spain. What happens if you tried to live in Spain? They would torture you or kill you until you converted or until you died. Okay, so a lot less religious tolerance there. So during this time, we see Europe come out of the Dark Ages, start the Renaissance. We see Muslim control, Muslim monopoly of the trade routes, and the Europeans want to have their own golden age. So how are they going to do that? Well, over here, I'm going to draw a very bad map. Here's the Iberian Peninsula. Here's Italy. You can tell because it's a boot. Middle East. Ooh, that was not a good drawing of it. India. We'll put China up here. And then Africa. Okay, the Iberian Peninsula is right here. What two European countries make up the Iberian Peninsula? Good, Spain and Portugal. Portugal is right here. Spain is right next to it. And remember, it used to be Muslim until 1492 with the Reconquista. Now it is Catholic. How Catholic? Violently Catholic. Super duper Catholic. Now let's say that Spain wants to get to the spice trade. The spice trade is going to be in the Spice Islands in Southeast Asia. So this is going to be the area of the spice trade. Well, how do they get from here to here? Well, they can't go over the Silk Roads, not if they want to do it cheaply, okay? Because who controls the Silk Roads? That would be the Ottoman Empire. And so if the Europeans want to take the Silk Roads to get to India, to get to the spice trade, then they're going to be charged taxes, okay? So that's held by the Ottomans as a monopoly. Well, what about the Mediterranean sea lanes? Well, the Italians monopolized that trade route. The Venetians in Italy control that route. And so same thing, if Spain and Portugal want to use the Mediterranean sea lanes, they're going to have to pay up. What about in Africa through the Saharan desert? Same thing, Islamic merchants, okay? And so the only route that the Portuguese have is to go around Africa, which is a long ways to go. They can't make that trip without stopping. And so one of the princes of Portugal, Henry the Navigator, is going to encourage a Portuguese influence in Africa. He's going to get involved in the gold trade, and he's also going to start a school for navigation, hence his name. Okay, that school of navigation is going to focus on making Portugal a maritime empire. Means that they need a lot of ship technology. So he takes technology from the East, like the compass and the lateen sail, and better maps. And through that school, he's able to build a navy. He's able to build a maritime force that puts Portugal on the map. Now, what is he going to do with that navy? Well, he wants to get over here to the spices. And so through government sponsorship, explorers like Bartholomew Diaz are going to set up trading posts along the coast of Africa, okay? Because they can't just go around Africa without stopping. They run out of food and water. They have to like make a pit stop, use the bathroom, buy something from the 7-Eleven, right? So as they hop along the coast of Africa, They establish these trading posts. So Portugal is going to become a trading post empire, right? Now, Bartholomew Diaz, and don't worry, we'll talk about him later in the Cornell notes. He gets to the tip of Africa before he has to go all the way back. So he doesn't make it to India, but they're halfway there. Vasco da Gama is the one who makes it all the way to India. So he builds on the route that Bartholomew Diaz built for him and makes it all the way, gathers up spices and profit, and then goes back to Portugal. Portugal is in the spice trade now. Okay, they are making money. Well, that leaves out Spain. What's Spain to do? They can't go east over the land. They can't go through the Mediterranean Sea. And now they can't go around Africa because Portugal has a monopoly on it. And they're going to charge Spain money if they want to use it. So Isabella and Ferdinand, okay, they have just reconquered Spain for the Catholics. And then this Italian, Christopher Columbus, comes up to them and says, hey, so y'all are kind of on a roll. You're kind of building an empire, it looks like. What if I could get Spain a route to the spice trade? And Isabella and Ferdinand are like, what do you mean? How do you get there? There's no way to go. You can't go north. It's too cold. Can't go west because you'll never make it. Now, they didn't think that he wouldn't make it because they thought the world was flat. Okay, they know that the world is round at this point. Okay, here's the issue. The world is big. And between Spain and Asia, there is a large ocean, the Atlantic Ocean. Now, they didn't know that there was any land in the area between them and Asia, right? So they just figured it was a bunch of water. Now, whereas the Portuguese could stop at these port cities and replenish their stores, if you take a bunch of ships west, they might get halfway through the ocean before they run out of goods and then they die. There's nowhere for them to make a pit stop. And so Ferdinand and Isabella tell Christopher Columbus no like 5 different times, but he is persistent. He comes back and he says, no, the math is wrong. The world is actually smaller than everyone says it is. The ocean isn't that big. Also, the world is shaped like a pear. He had some interesting ideas, most of which were wrong, including the size of the world. But because he thought that the world was smaller than it was, he thought that he could make it from Europe to Asia by heading west. And so finally, Ferdinand and Isabella are like, oh, if we give him ships, he'll go away. If he sails west and he makes it to the spice trade, then yay, we get rich. If he sails west and dies to death, then he's no longer bothering us, right? So they give him his ships, he sails west, and he lands in the Caribbean islands and he meets the Taino people. Now, Columbus believed that he had landed in Asia. Okay, so when he encountered the Taino people, he was like, oh, these must be Indians. And so that's where we get the misnomer of calling Native Americans or the indigenous peoples Indians. Okay, but did he land in India? No, he did not. He landed in the Caribbean. However, despite all the evidence contrary, he went into his deathbed insisting that he had actually made it to Asia. Okay, so even up until he died, he was like, yeah, no, it's definitely Asia. And then Amerigo Vespucci and Ferdinand Magellan are like, actually, no, it's a whole new thing. But he's like, no, you're wrong. I'm right. Okay, so he comes back to Spain with news of his discovery, and they send more ships and more conquistadors like Hernan Cortez and Francisco Pizarro, who eventually come into contact with the major empires of the New World. And they notice how impressive these empires are, how their infrastructure is great, and how they have a bunch of wealth. Okay, and so that's when we're going to get to their shift in interest away from the spice trade. And they're going to say, oh, actually, I think this continent might get us richer quicker. There might be more to exploit here. So Christopher Columbus originally tried to get to Asia by sailing west because the spice trade was so profitable. Portugal found their route. Spain wanted their own route. But instead, he landed in the quote unquote New World. And so that's what jumpstarts the age of exploration. Okay, that's when we get the Columbian Exchange, the exchange of goods and ideas and diseases and foods between the Old World and the New World. Okay, now when Christopher Columbus arrived in the New World, did he find a bunch of spices? No, okay, because the spices were in Asia. He hadn't made it to Asia, but he did find some other things that were profitable. He found bullion, which is a fancy word for gold and silver. And then eventually the European countries of Portugal and Spain are going to move away from just mining gold and silver out of the New World and start exploiting the temperate, the climate of the New World, okay, the tropical climate, in order to start plantations that grow cash crops. Okay, so y'all may remember the Aztecs in Mexico with Tenochtitlan had over 250,000 people. They had built Chinampas. They were a tributary state. Hernan Cortez comes and is able to conquer them. The Inca in Peru are going to be conquered by Pizarro. And the wealth that they have, particularly their precious metals, are going to be taken back to the mother country, to Spain and to Portugal. So even though they had a ton of gold and silver, right, which is nice, pretty metal, they lacked dangerous metal. They lacked the kind of metal that would be useful for weapons. They don't have bronze and iron and steel. The Inca have a little bit of metal, but not nearly on the same level as the Spanish conquistadors. Okay, think like they're decked out in armor, and they have swords, and they have guns and spears made of metal. They have horses. Okay, the Native Americans don't have any of that, so they're at a military disadvantage. So when the Spanish first come in, they take the Mita system, which y'all may remember was the Inca system of coerced labor. Basically, the Inca would have 15-year-olds to 50-year-olds work for a period of the year on public service stuff. They might farm, they might build buildings, they might build roads. So that's how the Inca were able to make their infrastructure, like the Carpanon, very impressive road spanning over 25,000 miles, right? Well, the Spanish take that and they bastardize it, meaning that they change it and change its intention. They change it into the encomienda system. This is slavery, okay? The enslavement of the native population. That's supposed to be an N, okay? So they take the indigenous peoples and they say, you're going to work for us mining gold and silver. Now, Christopher Columbus in particular was pretty brutal with his methods there. So for instance, in order to live, you had to meet a quota. And so to show that you had met your quota of collecting enough gold and silver, they would put a necklace around you with a little metal coin to indicate, okay, this Native American met their quota, they brought us gold and silver. If you didn't meet that quota, they would start cutting off your hands and your feet. Okay, Christopher Columbus captured children as young as 9 years old and sold them into sexual slavery. Okay, he fed babies to dogs. They sliced off the ears and noses and body parts of Native Americans. So a lot of people think like, oh, well, Christopher Columbus, that was a different time. You know, yeah, today he'd be canceled, but back then they didn't know any better. Yeah, even back then, Ferdinand and Isabella had him arrested and put in prison for what he had done in the New World. So this wasn't something new where they're like, oh, it was a different time. Like even by those standards, Bartholomew de las Casas, a former conquistador and a Catholic priest, wrote about the subjugation of the Native Americans and how awful the Europeans were to them, like literally feeding newborns to dogs. Okay, so this is a demographic disaster, okay, with this exploitation under the exploration of the New World. So part of that conquest included the enslavement of the Native Americans to mine in gold and silver mines, but it also included using their labor to grow crops. Now, not just food crops, right? But to grow cash crops. Because remember, the Native Americans aren't benefiting from the encomienda. Okay, they aren't growing their own crops to eat off of. They aren't collecting gold and silver and they get to keep a percentage of it. All of it goes to Spain. All of it goes to Portugal, right? So instead of using chinampas or floating gardens or the waru waru in order to grow food crops for the native population, now those fields are being used to grow crops that aren't used for survival. So cash crops are anything that's grown for a profit. So tobacco, okay, do you need tobacco to live? No, but it's addictive and therefore profitable. People will pay a lot of money for it. Sugar, do you need sugar to live? Maybe debatable for me. No, technically you don't, but it is addictive. Okay, it does release dopamine. It makes your brain feel good, which is why I can't stop eating after just one Oreo cookie. So tobacco and sugar and cotton and indigo, all of those are goods that are grown for profit. So the Native Americans grow the tobacco and the sugar on these plantations, and then they ship it back to the mother countries, back to Portugal and Spain, where then Portugal and Spain use them for their own profits. None of that profit goes back to the Native Americans, okay, because this is a coerced labor system. Does that make sense? So if the Spanish are using the indigenous population, well, we know that that's not the only type of slave labor that was used in the Americas. Okay, if they were already enslaving the Americas or the Americans, then how did the transatlantic slave trade happen with Africa? How did the Middle Passage emerge? Well, the Native Americans weren't as profitable as forced labor for a number of reasons. Number one, they lacked an immunity to old world diseases. Okay, what are some old world diseases that wiped out entire scores of Native American populations? Smallpox, good. Smallpox is the big one. If you can only name one disease, make sure that it is smallpox, at least in the context of the New World. For Old World, bubonic plague is bigger. All right, so smallpox, measles, tuberculosis, excellent. All of those are Old World germs. New World hadn't been in contact with them. So when the Europeans inadvertently brought smallpox over, it spread like wildfire. It started an epidemic, a pandemic, okay, wiping out 50% of the population as a whole within a century and up to 90% of the population in some areas. Okay, so disease wiped out the majority of the population, even more than conquest, y'all. Disease was a bigger factor in the decline of their population. Okay, but then you add conquest on top of that. How are the Native Americans who had these massive empires and these massive armies and all of these people, how did a couple of conquistadors end up subjugating them? Well, military advantage through superior weaponry. The natives didn't have metal that could be useful for weaponry. Gold and silver is not really good for making swords, right? Whereas the Europeans had horses, which the natives had not. Horses had long been extinct, and they have other beasts of burden. So they brought over horses. They're wearing metal armor. They've got spears. They've got swords. And most importantly, they have guns. Okay, remember, gunpowder came from China. New World didn't have any access to China, so no gunpowder for them until the Europeans bring it over. And so they're able to use these weapons to subjugate the native population to Spanish and Portuguese rule. Now, with that, the Europeans also attempted to eradicate not only the Native American population, but also the Native American culture. So they're also forced to submit to new religions. Now, if Spain and Portugal are the main players in colonizing the New World, what religion do you think was being spread to the Americas? Okay, good. Someone in the chat said Christianity, but what type of Christianity? Catholicism, good. Remind me, how Catholic were the Spanish after 1492? Deadly. They were super Catholic, violently Catholic. Y'all, they were violent even against the Muslims and Jews, and they all believe in the same God. Okay, so how do you think they reacted when they arrived in the New World? What kind of religion did the Aztec and the Inca follow? Were they worshiping Jesus? No, they'd never heard of Jesus. Okay, they were animistic. They focused on elements of nature. They were paganistic, polytheistic, because they had multiple gods. They were also practicing human sacrifice, especially the Aztec. Like the Aztec were human sacrificing every day. The Inca would save it for big events like special events, but the Aztec were like, yeah, no, we need to spill some blood or else the world ends, right? And so when the Catholics arrive in the New World and they see all this, they're just like, oh no, we're not having that. And so it's basically believe in Jesus or die. Okay, so they force conversions of the natives. So you have forced conversion, you have the use of superior weapons, you have the spread of disease. All of that decreases the native population drastically. Another reason that they're not as productive for slave labor for the Europeans is because they can run away successfully. Okay, they grew up on this continent. They speak the languages of the people on that continent. They may know how to run away and get help, or at least stay out of the way of the Europeans, go further west before the Europeans get to them. Okay, so if they're captured and enslaved under the encomienda system, right, and they're able to run away, they're much more likely to be successful than somebody who doesn't know their way around. And so for that reason, the asiento develops. And the asiento is the African slave trade from Africa to the Americas. Now, which European country, Spain or Portugal, had more contacts, had more of a history with Africa? Good. Someone in the private chat said Portugal. Remember that they had found a route around Africa to get to the spice trade. So they had established trading posts, okay, mini colonies along the coast of Africa. It's important to note, though, that even though the Portuguese had established areas along the coast of Africa, they couldn't invade and colonize Africa, okay, for a number of reasons. Number one, the Bantu people had spread the disease malaria through their migration prior to period 1. They had also spread sickle cell, which aided in immunity to smallpox. No, sorry, not smallpox, to malaria. The Europeans did not have that immunity. So if the Portuguese tried to invade the interior of Africa instead of staying along the coast, they would have been ravaged by malaria. Another issue is that the weapons that the Spanish and the Portuguese are able to use with such success against the Native Americans are the same weapons that the Africans have. Y'all, there are mighty empires in Africa prior to exploration. You have Mali and Ghana and Zimbabwe, okay, and Ethiopia. Okay, if the Europeans tried to invade Africa, Africa would kick their butts, right? Number one, malaria. Okay, and then number two, they have the same military weaponry. They have gunpowder, just like in Asia, they have gunpowder and guns and cannons. Okay, so it'd be an equal fight between Europe and Africa. It's not an equal fight between Europe and the Americas, okay, because the Americas are at a military disadvantage. So Portugal doesn't invade Africa. Instead, they set up port cities. Now, when they come into Africa, they're bringing manufactured goods like guns and alcohol, and they trade guns and alcohol for slaves. Remember that the slave trade has been going on since the beginning of history. At first, the majority of slaves came from the Kievan Rus in Eastern Europe. Okay, remember when they would gather up peasants and take them down to Constantinople? But eventually, the focus of the slave trade moves over into Africa. And slavery was not hereditary at that point. It was typically the lower rungs of society, like prisoners of war, debtors, criminals, witches in some cases. Okay, so, and you could get out of slavery. So it wasn't lifelong, it wasn't based on race, it wasn't hereditary. All that changes though with the Portuguese. The Portuguese start making it hereditary. They start making it based on race. They start making it lifelong, and they start making it incredibly deadly. Okay. And so the African tribes and kingdoms start selling their prisoners of war to the Portuguese as slaves, not knowing what the Asiento was going to become. All right. So eventually, the demand from the Portuguese for slaves becomes so great because they literally work the Africans to death on the sugar plantations in Brazil, that the African kingdoms don't have enough prisoners of war. They don't have enough debtors. They don't have enough criminals. And so they start wars with each other. They start fighting with each other using the guns that they bought from the Europeans in order to capture more prisoners of war. Eventually, the lower rungs of society start running out of people. So they start grabbing elites, okay, and nobles and wealthy people, and selling them to the Portuguese. So this is going to be incredibly disruptive to the African kingdoms and the African continent with this Portuguese Asiento. Okay, let's see. So once they have this new resource, once the Portuguese start bringing over people from Africa, they fix, okay, their initial problems with the Native Americans. Native Americans died because they lacked immunity to smallpox. Well, the Africans had immunity because remember, they're part of the old world, and the old world had been sharing their germs for tens of thousands of years. Okay, then two, the Native Americans, when they escaped, they would have some footing. I mean, they would know where they were and how to get away. All right, but if you move from one continent to another, okay, you have no clue where you are. And if you escaped and tried to get back to Africa, it's impossible. You can't cross an entire ocean by yourself. You can't just commandeer an entire ship by yourself in order to get back home. Okay, so those two factors, okay, led to the Portuguese focusing much more extensively on the Asiento as opposed to the Native Americans with the encomienda. The Spanish, however, stay with the encomienda as long as they can, because the Spanish don't have a slave trade. Okay, they don't have port cities in Africa. If the Spanish want slaves from Africa, they would have to buy them from the Portuguese. So the Portuguese are going to become very, very wealthy, not only off of the cash crops like sugar that they grow in their colonies in Brazil, but also off of the slave trade. Are we good so far? Okay. So when we look at motivations for why the Europeans wanted to explore in the first place, well, the thing that set it off, the catalyst, and catalyst just means the thing that starts something, was the search for a route to the spice trade, right? They wanted profit, money, wealth. That's going to be the biggest factor, the biggest motivation, the biggest cause for exploration. So that's the first G that we're going to cover in the mnemonic device, the 3 Gs. Okay, the 3 Gs are gold, glory, and God. With gold meaning wealth in general. It doesn't mean specifically just gold, no silver, no cash crops, okay? It's just a catch-all term for making money. Okay, so the first incentive was profit. The Portuguese want to get to the spice trade, so they find a route that's not controlled by the Italians and not controlled by the Muslims in order to get to that trade, to that spice trade. Then the Spanish try to follow suit with Christopher Columbus and sail west, and they stumble upon the quote-unquote New World. With the Portuguese, Henry the Navigator establishes his school of navigation, which is focused on making Portugal into a maritime empire. And in order to do that, they need to catch up with the rest of the world. And so they take these inventions from the East, like the magnetic compass, which always points north, the astrolabe, which helps you find your position on a map. It helps you determine latitude based on the celestial bodies in the sky. It just means the stars and the moon and the planets. Okay, so if you know where they're supposed to be at any given time, then you can use those as quote unquote landmarks, since when you're at sea, you don't have any landmarks around you to help guide you. And they're going to also bring in lateen sails from Asia. Y'all may remember those as the triangular sails that are useful for capturing the wind. They are particularly useful in the Indian Ocean trade due to monsoon winds, right? Well, in Europe, they didn't have lateen sails at first. They had square sails, as you can see in this picture. Now, those are useful for catching the wind, but only if you want to sail in the same direction that the wind is already blowing. Okay, so if the wind is blowing north and you have your sail open, you're going north, right? If you want to go south, well, take your sail down, anchor your ship, and wait for the winds to change, or get people in a rowboat. But that's a lot of manpower, right? So not as effective. Once lateen sails come over from Asia, that's when the school for navigation, that's when the Portuguese are like, okay, bet, let's combine the triangular sails with the square sails. So now we have a new ship, okay, syncretism, the Portuguese caravel, which utilizes both of these sails, square and lateen, so that we can travel faster and that we can travel in whatever direction we want. Okay, this is going to be particularly useful for traveling around the coast of Africa, okay, as opposed to the Spanish galleon, which is much bigger. Are we good so far? So with the creation of the School for Navigation, Henry the Navigator wasn't just looking for profits, he was also looking for glory. Okay, so the second of our 3 G's. They were tired of not having a golden age. They had come out of the Dark Ages, they're in the Renaissance, they feel like they deserve to be an empire, so the European countries start trying to develop empires. And one way to become an empire is to conquer things, to get bigger. Well, they can't conquer Africa for reasons we've already described. They've lost the eastern half of Europe to the Ottomans, so they can't really take that over. So they're out of land to conquer until the Americas are discovered. That's when they can go in and it's like, oh, it's free real estate, right? Even though there are people already living there, okay, the people that already live there don't have guns, okay, and they don't have immunity. And so that's going to allow the conquistadors an advantage in conquering. And so when those conquistadors arrive, they're going to be planting the flag of their mother country. They're going to come in, they're going to declare, I claim this land for Ferdinand and Isabella, okay, and put the Spanish flag. So in the New World, you're going to start seeing these areas popping up in older maps that are called like New Spain and New France and New England, okay, even New York. Okay, all of these are named after places in Europe because the Europeans were the ones who colonized the Americas. Okay, so that brings glory to their empire by expanding, by getting wealthy. And the conquistadors also want their share of glory. They want to go down in history as conquerors and to become wealthy. Lastly, you have the 3rd G, God, the Christian duty to convert. Remember that Christianity is a proselytizing religion. Okay, they've already lost territory. One, they lost the Crusades, so they couldn't take the Holy Land. Then they lost the eastern half of the Roman Empire to the Ottoman Turks. Okay, and they can't spread Christianity in Africa. The only place they have in Africa that's Christian is Ethiopia. Okay, so they want to convert people. You know, and China already has Confucianism and Buddhism, so they're like, yeah, no, thank you. We'll pass on the Christianity. And so if they want to spread their religion, well, now they found an entire continent full of conquerable pagans, quote unquote. okay, that they can force to convert. They can't go to China and point guns at people and say, love Jesus, because then the Chinese will point their guns right back. They're like, dude, we invented guns, right? But they can do that in the Americas, and they do. Okay, so you see a continuity between the Reconquista, how the Catholics treat non-Catholics in Europe is similar to how they treat non-Catholics in the New World. They treat them with violence and forced conversions, like what we see with the Muslims and the Jews following the reconquering of Al-Andalus for Spain. Are we good so far? But if you were going to list the main motivation, which of these three motives do you think was the biggest incentive? Gold, glory, or God? Okay, I see someone in the private chat said gold. I mean, that would be a very strong argument to make. If I were going to write an essay where it said compare and contrast, or let's say analyze the causes and the effects of exploration in the New World. Well, yeah, I'm going to talk about the three G's as the causes. And I would say, yeah, the search for profit, that started exploration. First, they went for spices. Then they went and found gold and silver and cash crops. And that started slavery in the New World with the encomienda and also the asiento. Okay, so a lot of all of this ties back to profit, right? And also, the religion was used to justify what they were doing to the Native Americans. It was used to justify the exploitation of the natives and the taking of their wealth by saying, oh, well, God wants us to do this because we're saving their souls. We're killing them. We're killing their bodies, but we're saving their souls. So, works out, right? Any questions so far? All right, now if you want to get into more detail about the causes for exploration beyond just the mnemonic device, the three Gs, all right, that's what we're going to cover here. We're going to get a little bit more in depth. Okay, so context for exploration. What was happening in the 1450s? Well, the Renaissance, which was the rebirth. That's supposed to be an E. The rebirth of knowledge, the interest in knowledge after the Dark Ages. Okay, the rebirth of Greco-Roman antiquity that had been preserved by the Islamic centers of learning in Timbuktu and Cordoba and Baghdad, with the House of Baghdad, with the medical and mathematical innovations that came from India with the Gupta Empire. Okay, the technology from the Chinese during their golden age, right? All of that had been spreading through the other empires. Europe was behind. So they got a lot of catching up to do. They revive the philosophies of Plato and Socrates and Hippocrates, and they combine all the new knowledge together because they're living at the dawn of a new age, a new era. So very, very optimistic, this idea of, okay, we're next. We're going to have a golden age. This is it. And so for that search of knowledge, you also get the spread of information much faster than you had in period one. And one of the major causes of that is this new technology known as the Gutenberg printing press, which was invented in Germany by Johann Gutenberg. Now, there's already a prototype for this created in, in Asia with woodblock printing. Excuse me. My throat's getting sore from talking so long. The woodblock printing in Asia. So with woodblock printing, take a piece of wood, carve into it the mirror image of whatever you want printed, slap some ink on it, push it on the paper. You can print as many pages as you want after you've carved it. Okay, but what happens if you made a typo? What if you want to change what that page says? Well, then you've got to start over. You got to throw the whole wood block out and start carving again. Well, Johann Gutenberg was like, okay, wait, what if we just take the alphabet, right? Hear me out. What if we take blocks and just put the letter on each block? Like, here's an A, here's a B, here's a C, and then we arrange them like Scrabble tiles, right, into words. Okay, kind of like, yeah, some of you are like mind blown. Okay, so kind of like with your keyboard. There aren't words on your keyboard that you're just like, oh, I'm going to hit this button for the, right? There are letters, so you can just type them together. Okay, that's basically the concept that we have with the Gutenberg printing press. So what this means is you can print more stuff. Instead of having to carve each individual page onto a piece of wood, you can just arrange the different blocks to spell words to fill out the page. So that means more books can be printed for less money and they can be printed faster. So that means there's more books in circulation. So books aren't as rare anymore. So books are cheaper, they're inexpensive. So more people have access to those books and the things in those books like knowledge. And so we see the cultural diffusion of information increase as a result of this technology. Okay, so we have more printed books. We're not having monks and nuns handwrite them anymore. Now we're printing them and making as many copies as we want. Okay, this is going to lead to the spread of those texts, but also in addition to just, text, it's also going to be spreading more accurate maps. Okay, so we see better cartography. Cartography is the study or the creation of maps. So the maps get more accurate, which is, kind of a good thing if you're planning on exploring or sailing somewhere, right? So here we have an example of a globe. Now, again, like I said before, they already knew that the world was round. The reason that no one had sailed west before wasn't because they were afraid they'd fall off the edge of the earth, like it was a frisbee or something, but because they were afraid that they would run out of food before they reached the end of the ocean. Okay, and Christopher Columbus, with his bad math, was like, yeah, no, the world's smaller. Okay, and he just lucked out because he landed in the Caribbean, right? So here we have the terrestrial globe. They knew the world was round. What you'll notice about this time period in the Old World is that most of the Old World was dominated by Muslim empires and Muslim merchants. Okay, Africa. Islam spread through Africa through the Trans-Saharan trade route. You also have the Swahili coast, the Indian Ocean trade, the Ottoman Empire in the Middle East, the Delhi Sultanate in India, and then later the Mughal Empire after the fall of the Mongols in India. Okay, so Islamic merchants dominate trade routes, which is going to be one of the factors that leads Portugal and Spain to try and find new trade routes to Asia. And then again, we go back to the 3 G's of proselytizing, the spread of the Christian religion, specifically the Catholic religion. Are we good so far? Okay. What did they think was at the end of the world? Someone asked me in the private chat. That's a misnomer. They didn't think that there was an end of the world. They thought that so there was a globe, and they, hold on, let me see if I can pull up a picture to make this easier. Map of world. Aha. I'm going to change the share over. Okay, so if you look at this map, okay, they're starting here. All they know about is in this Eastern Hemisphere. Okay, this is Eastern Hemisphere. Hemi means half, sphere means circle. So this is the old world. This is all they know about. Christopher Columbus thought that there was nothing here. So erase in your mind, if you can, erase the Americas and just imagine blue ocean. Okay, so he thought that he could sail through the ocean and make it over here and that he would get to Asia. Now, everyone else had done the math and they're like, yeah, no, that's way too much ocean. You'll never make it because you'll run out of fuel. You'll run out of food and water, like somewhere in the middle, and you'll die to death. Right? But Christopher Columbus said, no, I think the earth is shaped like a pear, so I'm going to try it. I'm going to go for it. And that's why he landed here in the Caribbean, thinking that he had ended up here. Okay, because his size of the world was off by a lot. So there was no edge of the world where they're like, oh, I'm going to fall off and fall into space. Okay, shifting back to technology. So most of this technology spread from Asia, okay? And it was going to be preserved by the Islamic centers of learning like Timbuktu and Baghdad with the House of Wisdom and Cordoba in the Al-Andalus. And eventually the Europeans get access to that technology through cultural diffusion. And they're going to build upon that technology to create new things like the caravel. Okay, all of this technology is going to help with maritime trade, sea travel, which is a key factor in the Europeans' conquest with exploration. So with advances in astronomy, this is different from astrology. Astrology is like, what's your sign? I'm a Sagittarius, whatever, we can't be friends. Or Mercury's in retrograde, or what's your moon chart, or whatever it is that you kids are into nowadays. Astronomy is the scientific study of the stars. So like Orion's belt, or knowing when there's going to be an eclipse, okay, or knowing the position of the moon, okay, that's astronomy. And it's going to be particularly helpful in figuring out where you are at sea, because you don't have landmarks. That's the whole point. You're at sea, there's no land. So how are you supposed to tell where you are on the map? Well, by using this technology. All of these three different technologies, the astrolabe, the quadrant, the cross staff, the sextant, all of them do the same thing using the sky. They determine latitude, which is this part of the map going across. Longitude is up and down, north and south. East and west is latitude. So by using the position of the stars, by knowing where they're supposed to be at a given time, they're able to determine where they were in the world. And that's particularly helpful if you're sailing across an entire ocean to the New World. Also, the compass helped them determine which way was north. Now, one common mistake that I see students do with SAQs or essays, free response questions, is they'll say something like, the compass helped to steer the ship north. No, y'all. That's like me saying that my GPS drove me to work. Now, I turned the steering wheel. The wheel is what changed the direction of the car and the brakes and everything. Okay, the GPS just told me this is the route to take. Okay, so make sure that you're specific with that. If you describe what a magnetic compass is in an SAQ or an essay, just say it always points north so that they know which direction to sail if they want to go north, west, east, or south. Does that make sense? Okay, now do you need to know every single piece of technology that's on this list? No. If you want to pick one of these, like the astrolabe, all right, that's fine. But the magnetic compass and the lateen sails are probably your best bets. Those are the ones that we're going to see pop up most often, because the lateen sail is critical in the creation of the caravel. Remember that Prince Henry the Navigator in 1419 created the School for Navigation because he wanted Portugal to be a world power, to be a superpower, and he knew that they were behind. So through that School of Navigation, he takes technology from the East, like the lateen sail, which allows you to sail into the wind, and combined it with the European square sails to create the Portuguese ship of the caravel, which is going to be particularly useful moving along the African coast in their trading post empire. Now the rudder, okay, that is what helps change the direction that a ship is sailing in. So if you turn the wheel on the ship, it is connected to a rudder that shifts the position of that rudder, and thus it can change whether you're going left, right, north, south, east, west, okay, not the compass. And then another major factor in their ability to conquer the New World and also to maintain a monopoly in their route to Asia was through the Chinese invention of gunpowder and the Mongol invention of cannons. Okay, so gunpowder and cannons are going to be essential in conquering in the New World, as well as maintaining their monopoly in the Old World in their route through or around Africa to the spice trade. In fact, the Portuguese are going to basically become pirates in the Indian Ocean. How that happens is they start saying, hey, we're in charge now. If you want to sail in the Indian Ocean, you've got to buy a license from us. You got to buy a certificate, right? Well, what if you're like, I'm not going to pay all that money for a certificate from the Portuguese. I'm just going to wing it. I'm going to sail through the Indian Ocean. Well, if they caught you, if they boarded your ship and you didn't have that certificate, they would kill you and take your stuff and sink your ship. And they would say, hey, it's the law. We offered you a certificate to buy and you turned it down, so now we get all your stuff. If they boarded your ship and you did have the certificate, then they'd leave you alone. Okay, so they're basically end up controlling Indian Ocean trade as they rise as an empire with the funds that they get from the New World that make them ridiculously wealthy. Are we good so far? All right, some pictures of that technology. Here we have the Astrolabe. The Astrolabe and the sextant do the same thing where they use the celestial bodies in the sky to determine latitude. The compass always points north. They got better maps. Particularly, they started moving away from symbolic maps to accurate maps. Now, this is not an accurate map, y'all. This is more art. This is artsy, right? We know that this is not what the continents look like. For my OCD, it would make me feel really good if they looked like that, right? All equal sizes and shapes, but that's not the case. This instead is symbolic. So let's look at some of the symbolism in this image. In the center, we have the holy city of Jerusalem, okay, tying together Europe and Asia and Africa. And that's because to the Christians and the Muslims, Jerusalem was a holy city, right? So that's why it's at the center. Europe is Christian, Africa is Islamic, and then Asia, if you count the Middle East, which here Syria and the Arabian Peninsula, they do, and India, that also includes the Muslim faith. So at the center of it all is Jerusalem. So religion is significant during this time period. It is a major motivation, both politically and economically. Okay, it's one of the 3 G's. Another thing that's significant about this is that all the continents are equal size and shape. That shows that they're on an equal playing field. Okay, Europe is rising into its own. It's becoming a superpower. It is catching up with the continents of Africa and Asia. Africa and Asia have been dominating period 1. Okay, now Europe comes up in period 2. Okay, so they are of equal significance and equal weight and power. Whereas over here in America, it's separate and it's smaller. It's resigned to the corner as not as important. It's important because it makes Europe rich. Does that make sense? Okay. Here's the Portuguese caravel. Here's the triangular sail, the Latin sail from Asia, the square sail. Remember, the square sail will take you in whatever direction the wind is currently blowing. If you want to go in a different direction, that's when you get the Latin sail. Okay, this is going to be a moneymaker for the Portuguese because it allows them to establish their trading post empire. Good so far? All right. So let's do a review of the motives or the causes of European exploration. The first G, God. Okay, religion played a factor. They wanted to convert people to Catholicism. And they weren't having much luck in the old world, so they tried the new world where they could force conversions. Ambition, that would fall under glory. Okay, expanding their empire, making a bigger empire, making money, okay, from mercantilism, from exploiting those colonies for their wealth, political opportunities, more money, more power, right? How did they get that glory? Well, through government sponsorship, through the monarchies funding these conquests. Prince Henry funded a school for navigation that allowed Portugal to find a route around Africa. Isabella and Ferdinand sponsored Christopher Columbus. He didn't have boats and ships and a crew and all of those supplies. They gave him that with the understanding that whatever wealth he found on his journeys would come back to Spain. Now, this ties into the economic policy of mercantilism. And y'all, you need to know what mercantilism is. Not just this year, you're also going to need it sophomore year with APUSH, and junior year with Euro, and senior year with Gov and Econ. In every AP class that you take in the history department here, you will need to know what mercantilism is. So you might as well write it down and go ahead and brand it into your brain, right? Mercantilism is not capitalism. Okay, in capitalism, there's a free market. There's the law of supply and demand, right? There are individuals who can become wealthy and own their own businesses, right? Under mercantilism, it's the government. The government makes money. The government controls the economy. Okay, the government gets the profit. So how that works is the government has a mother country like Spain and Portugal, and that mother country has colonies. And the purpose of the colonies is to make the mother country rich. Okay, so let's look at Brazil. Brazil is the colony of the Portuguese. In Brazil, they have sugar plantations. Now, who's working in the sugar plantations? Native Americans and enslaved Africans, right? Do they benefit at all from that? No. None of the wealth that they generate goes back to them. Okay, they're not paid wages, right? All of that wealth that's generated in Brazil doesn't stay in Brazil. It goes back to the king and queen of Portugal. That's mercantilism. The purpose of the colonies is to enrich the mother country. Isabella and Ferdinand, the colonies that they establish in Mexico, okay, with the encomienda. Does any of the gold and silver and cash crops that they accumulate there benefit Mexico? No, because it's a colony. Its purpose is to enrich Spain at all costs. Okay, so all that gold and silver is going to be the main form of wealth, goes back to the mother country. Okay, then eventually the Netherlands get involved in colonization and they start forming joint stock companies like the Dutch East India Company. The British get in and they form the British East India Company. Okay, all government sponsored groups that are meant to enrich the mother country. That's what mercantilism is. Okay, it's not individuals becoming wealthy off of selling their goods that there's a high demand for. It is the government controlling the market. Are we good? Okay, for context, the Renaissance, you have curiosity about the world, the belief that you're at the beginning of a new era, that's optimism, that you're on your way to a golden age, that you can do anything. And then the catalyst was spices. Okay, because all of this started, the discovery, quote unquote, of the New World was started because of the search for spices, a route to get to India, to get to Asia. And then the last G, we've already covered God, we've already covered glory. The last G is gold, which is just a catch-all for money. First it was spices, then it was gold and silver, then it was cash crops. And eventually Portugal with the Asiento slave trade, they get wealthy off of that. Are we good? Okay. So who benefited the most from this exploration? Definitely the Europeans. Who suffered greatly? The Americans. Okay, so let's talk about why. They suffered a huge demographic catastrophe. What does demographic mean? We'll break it down into its Latin roots. You have graph and demo. If we look at a word like democracy, good, Elizabeth. Crassy means government. And like Elizabeth said, she says it's relating to people. Demo means people. So democracy is government by the people. So if we look at demographic, that means people. And when we think graphic, we think like numbers, like measurements. So that means number. So the number of people, the population. Demographic means population. Whenever you come across words that you're not entirely sure what it means, break it down into its roots. Like hemispheres. What does hemi mean? Half. Good, TJ. And sphere. A sphere is a circle. Right? So when we look at the globe, it's divided into hemispheres. Okay, we have two halves of the world. Okay, these two halves were the New World and the Old World. And they were isolated from each other. They hadn't been exchanging goods or ideas or diseases. Okay, until the Old World met up with the New World. And that's when they start a pandemic. Okay, the spread of smallpox, measles, and flu. So that's going to be a demographic catastrophe due to disease. Disease is catastrophic to the Native American population, the number of people. Okay, it wipes out about 50% of people in most areas within 100 years. And in some areas, it's even as high as 90%. So even more than conquest, okay, disease wiped out the Native American population almost entirely, okay, almost completely lost, as well as aspects of their culture that were eliminated in the Spanish and Portuguese conquests. Okay, so if you ever get a question asking, what was the biggest factor in the decline of the Native American population? Okay, there are numerous factors, but the biggest one, okay, biggest superlative is disease. Disease is the big one. Conquest, slavery, yes, but disease has the biggest impact. Are we good so far? Okay. In the Schoology page, I have these videos linked in the lecture series. We're not going to watch them together because they're like 10 minutes long and there's a bit of a lag over Zoom, so I'm not going to put y'all through that. But you should watch it on your own time when you get a chance, especially as a review, okay? Because John Green goes pretty fast, but he hits like the good information that you need. Now, in order to understand the Columbian Exchange, which it's named after Columbus, right? The Columbian Exchange goes two ways. It goes between the old world and the new world. So you'll see that it goes in both directions, y'all. This isn't just the old world getting stuff, right? There's also things that transfer over into the new world. So the Columbian Exchange is a two-direction exchange. It goes both ways, where they exchange ideas, they exchange people, they exchange goods, food, diseases. Okay, anything that goes from new to old or from old to new is doing so through the Columbian Exchange. And that exchange between old and new creates a triangular trade. Okay, triangular because it has three legs. So first they start in Europe and they go to Africa. And you need to know the three legs, the direction they go in, and what goods were traded on those legs. Okay, critically important, right? So first you go from Europe to Africa, then from Africa to the Americas, then from the Americas to Europe. Okay, hence the triangular trade nomer. So first in this leg, from Europe to Africa, the Europeans are going to be bringing manufactured goods. That's guns, alcohol, other manufactured trinkets, okay? Not stuff you find in nature. You don't find alcohol and guns in nature, right? You create them. And once they get to Africa, they trade those manufactured goods. They trade for slaves, right? Remember that the African kingdoms had captured prisoners of war and debtors and criminals. It was a different type of slavery than what we're going to see develop in the Asiento. Okay, so then the Europeans with the Asiento would take the enslaved peoples to the Americas. That's the second leg, from Africa to the Americas. And this is also known as the Middle Passage. Incredibly deadly for the enslaved peoples. Okay, then that slave labor combined with the Native American slave labor would be used to produce raw materials, meaning things that you could find in nature. So cash crops, sugar, tobacco, cotton, they're not made into goods yet. Then on this third leg, from the Americas to Europe, the colonies would send all that profit, all that raw material to Europe, for Europe to manufacture it and then sell those goods and thus make money. Okay, so sugar could be manufactured into rum. So sugar becomes alcohol, and then the cycle starts over again. They take those manufactured goods to Africa and trade them for slaves, for people that they then enslave. Then they go from Africa to the Americas, where they make the raw goods. Then they take all that wealth. None of it goes to the Americas. Instead, it goes to Europe. Okay, so you need to know those three legs. You're also going to need to know the advantages and disadvantages, the positive and the negative things, the short-term effects and the long-term effects of that Columbian Exchange. And that's what we're going to cover when we get back on Thursday. So y'all are almost caught up with second period. There's only like a couple minutes that you're behind. So I'm going to go ahead and make a note that that's where we left off.